Terraria is one of my most favourite games of all time, and that's really saying something. Usually my favourite games are JRPGs, which are what my top 2 favourites are, but somehow this sandbox game just so happened to slip through. Although I can't play sandbox games for long because they hurt my head, Terraria is an excellent game with a lot of content in it, and I've also been meaning to talk about it for a while, but before I do, I'd appreciate it if you went down below and subscribed. I'm almost near 400 subscribers, so it'd be cool if I could reach that one day. But anyway, here's our video about Terraria with fellow content creator HexicalHazel. For the one person who somehow doesn't know what Terraria is, it is a sandbox adventure game which heavily revolves around exploration. Terraria perfects exploration by adding a ton of areas and locations both on the surface and under the ground. On the surface, there are different biomes which range from your average basic overworld to a land filled with corruption, whereas underground you'll find a lot of abandoned areas. Whilst exploring and gaining resources, you can craft better armor and weapons to fight off against the enemies that this game has. And with the blocks you obtain, you can create houses for NPCs to live in. We'll be explaining this all more in detail and giving some opinions about them, but first let's quickly talk about the art style. Obviously, if you couldn't tell, the art style bears a resemblance to the 16-bit generation of consoles, specifically the Super Nintendo. You can see this pretty well when you put on the Mushroom Vanity set. You can almost see how similar the sprite is to the original Toad from Super Mario All-Stars. And if you saw my Rivals of Ether video, you would know that I really love pixel art and the devs really put a lot of hard work into this.
In Terraria, there are a total of 4 main classes. These consist of Melee, which focuses on swords, boomerangs, yo-yos and other close-range weapons. This class is also the most defensive, which means you can tank more hits than the other classes. Ranger, which focuses on long-range combat using guns, bows and throwable items which have limited ammo. Mage, which relies on mana-based magical weapons like wands and spell tomes. When you run out of mana, you can either wait for it to regen or use mana potions, however using these potions will cause your weapon's DPS to lower. And then finally Summoner, which uses minions to support you that deal an insane amount of damage per second, and can be controlled by whips to target enemies. However, this is compensated by this class being a glass cannon, which have little to no defense.
NPCs in Terraria act like many different things. Most act like shops that sell you items like weaponry, accessories, and blocks, while others act a bit differently, like building up money or just simply giving advice. However, to get these NPCs, you'll need a home for them, which is where building comes into play. Anything like this will be able to house an NPC as long as it has a door, table, chair, light, and wall. And since this is a sandbox game, you should get creative with it and build whatever you desire. Stuff like this which me and Hazel have built, for example. There are quite a few biomes in this game, which are sectioned off into different categories. Now, because there are a lot of them, I'll just be going over the important ones and the ones that I personally like. This is the biome the player usually spawns in when they create a new world, and considering it is the safest biome, many players decide to set up a base and obtain resources here. And this is also where you'll meet your first NPC, the guide. Also within this biome there are trees which you can cut down for wood. And with 1.4, they added wind, which makes this biome look amazing. The underground, which is where most of the exploration will take place, is a massive area underneath the surface layer, where you can find many upgrades like weaponry, accessories, ores, and life crystals, which can permanently upgrade your maximum health. Sometimes the area around you is very open, allowing you to attack enemies that lie within the underground from many angles, and allowing you to explore more openly. But on the contrary, it could be very tight, meaning your exploration can lessen and it can be very easy for enemies to overwhelm you. While exploring, you may find mini biomes such as marble and granite, which are home to some unique enemies and good building blocks. The underground is also influenced by the biome it's underneath, namely snow, desert, jungle, mushroom, and world evils. When creating a world, you have the option for Crimson and Corruption. You can of course press the random button and it will give you one of the two. These biomes are bad news. Basically what they do is that their infection spreads all throughout the map. NPCs can't live in this type of biome, so it's important to keep track on where it spreads to. Although it sucks cause they look pretty cool. Crimson is decorated with flesh and bones, giving you a slight chill down your spine, and Corruption is all purple with the ground and background being all jagged and decayed. The enemies within these biomes reflect the themes around them, such as the face monster from the Crimson being a red, fleshy, deformed humanoid creature, and the Eater of Souls from the Corruption is a parasite-like creature with eyeballs all over it that can float. Later on in the game, you'll be able to get a Contaminator, which can purify the lands and return them to their normal forms, basically eradicating the world evil. However, these aren't the only two biomes that can spread. The Hallow is a fairy tale inspired biome which is inhabited with fairies and unicorns. Unlike Crimson and Corruption, the spread of this biome will not cause harm to your world, so NPCs can live here no problem. However, alongside this biome, there is a boss fight you could accidentally trigger without noticing. Maybe it's because you flail around with a sword, but if you accidentally kill a prismatic lacewing, the Empress of Light will be summoned.
Bosses are a major part of Terraria's progression. Though it is slightly linear, you can tackle these bosses at any time you'd like. However, once certain conditions are met, specific bosses can spawn randomly to encourage progress. King Slime, while not needed for progression, should be the first boss you normally fight, as it is simple and gives you some decent gear to progress to harder bosses. Its main gimmick is that it bounces towards you and can spawn smaller slimes when you hit it. This is one of the few bosses that can appear at random, as it can spawn on the outer thirds of the map or during a slime room. Eye of Cthulhu, as the name suggests, is a big eye that will dash towards you and try to kill you. Once its HP drops below a certain amount, it will spin wildly around and the eye will become a giant mouth. There it will charge faster at you. These next two bosses are, as the name suggests, biome specific, which means they can only be summoned and fought in one biome. One of the bosses can only be summoned in the Crimson, that being the Brain of Cthulhu. Brain of Cthulhu has these minions called creepers, which need to be defeated before you can attack the actual boss itself. Once the brain opens up, you can attack it, however, then it will teleport around and create illusions to trick the player as it slowly closes in on you. The other boss, which can only be summoned in the Corruption, is the Eater of Worlds. This boss is a worm that burrows through the ground and jumps out at you. This boss requires you to beat each segment, as when you break one segment, it will split apart from the rest of it. Skeletron is a big flying skull with floating bone arms and hands. The hands will try and slap you and the skull will spin towards you. However, unlike for the previous bosses that were mentioned, this boss can only be summoned at the entrance of the dungeon via an NPC. Beating him will unlock the rest of the dungeon. The Wall of Flesh is a massive wall made of flesh. It also has two big eyes and one mouth, and can only be fought in the underworld. Any attempts of leaving the underworld while this boss is still active will result in a very nice and handy status effect which kills you. The wall will approach you at moderate speed, however as its HP drops it will get faster. After you defeat the Wall of Flesh, the game will enter hard mode, meaning tougher enemies and bosses will be unlocked. The first of these bosses is the Mechanical Trio, one being the Destroyer, which is a robotic form of the Eater of Worlds, but instead of splitting into segments, once each part is hit, a probe will fly out and lasers will shoot at you. Skeletron Prime is a metallic version of the Skeletron, but with two extra hands. The final boss is the Twins, which is a pair of mechanical eyeballs, which are near identical to the Eye of Cthulhu, except one of them is a famous reference to famous YouTuber Jacksepticeye. Plantera is an enormous flower who is awoken after breaking Plantera's bowl, which is found in the underground jungle after defeating these mech bosses. She will cling to blocks and dash towards you while shooting spiky balls and seeds. Within the jungle, there is a temple which houses Golem and the lizard people. While looking somewhat menacing, he is easily cheesed and a pushover of a boss. The cultist can be found at the dungeon after defeating all previous mandatory bosses. However, before the lunatic cultist shows up, you must kill his followers, whom of which are very easy to defeat. Once the lunatic cultist appears, he will teleport around shooting magical based attacks towards you, and once he is defeated, 4 pillars will appear across the map. These act as mini events as many enemies will spawn, and you need to defeat them in order to take down the pillar's shield. When all 4 are beaten, the Moon Lord shows up, who is the final boss of Terraria. This boss has many attack points which must all be taken down before the core is open to attack. Now there are many other bosses that we won't mention, but if we did that, the video would be a lot longer than it really should be. But overall for the bosses, I think they are very well designed and have unique attack patterns, minus Golem.
And for me, they make the game much more enjoyable. And I think that just about covers everything about this game. Obviously there is a lot of stuff that we missed probably, but if you haven't already played Terraria, I highly suggest you do. And hey, look at that, they just started rolling out 1.4 onto consoles, which is great. It's honestly a really amazing game with lots of replayability value. Anyway, hopefully you all enjoyed today's video, but before I sign off, I'd appreciate it if you went ahead and subscribed to Hazel, as she creates her own content on her channel. She covers series downfalls and a whole bunch of other things. Make sure you subscribe and like if you enjoyed the video, but I'll see you guys next time.